The fateful Christmas party in Illinois. Let me set the scene. It was last December, and our family's classic red brick house in the heart of Evanston, Illinois, glowed with holiday lights visible from blocks away. The tree by the bay window sparkled, its ornaments a history of family milestones. There were garlands everywhere, fresh cider bubbling on the stove, and the kind of laughter that hid more than it revealed. I was 32, still the good daughter on paper, but rumbling with something stubborn just beneath the surface. Our annual Christmas party was always the Sullivan family's big affair. Cousins from out of state, aunts with hug schedules, boisterous uncles, even a few neighbors who never missed Donna Sullivan's cinnamon rolls. Everyone crammed into the living room, sifting through the pile of gifts and filling every corner with the hum of small talk about winter storms or job promotions. Jake, my husband, yes, husband, stood quietly at my side. Most thought he was just my boyfriend, still unaware of the life-changing step we'd taken. He clasped my hand under the table, thumb drawing soft circles on my palm whenever conversation edged too close to home. On the surface, things looked perfect. Food circulated, music drifted, and everyone opted for what my family always loved best, appearances. But beneath it all, there was an icy tension I couldn't shake. My mother would flash me a tight-lipped grin from across the room before glancing pointedly at Tona's boyfriend, who was regaling a crowd with stories about hedge fund escapades and expensive travel. Dad, meanwhile, whispered proud updates about Tona to the neighbors, seldom mentioning me unless prompted. As the evening hummed along, I realized my chest felt tight, my pulse skipping with every forced laugh. That's the thing about family gatherings. You know every code in the silence. When it was time for the annual toast, Donna called for everyone's attention, wine glasses raised high. I'd known for days this was my moment, the crossroads. My heart was a jackhammer as I stood, the room dimming, all eyes swiveling to me. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied. "There's something I want to share," I said. The chatter died, replaced by a hush so complete I could hear the steam hissing from the kitchen. "I'm married," I declared, staring straight ahead. Jake and I, my words barely landed before I heard the sharp draw of breath from my mom, Donna. Dad's face crumpled into an ache I'd never seen before. Tona's head snapped up, a perfect eyebrow raised. Her glass, frozen midair. You could taste the shock, icy, metallic, and final. There were a few awkward coughs. My grandmother dropped her spoon with a soft clink. The celebration's warmth curdled into cold disbelief. My mother's response was as cutting as ever. "We deserve better than this, Brooke." Dad's lips thinned. Tona muttered something under her breath, probably about respect or pedigree. Relatives peered at me, as if I'd spoken in tongues. In that moment, the holiday cheer felt like glass shattering slowly, all around me. What stayed with me wasn't just their anger, but the depth of their disappointment. So practiced, it felt intentional. My declaration left them exposed. No more roles to play, just raw expectation and judgment laid bare. For a split second, I considered backing down, smoothing things over. But then, Jake squeezed my hand from under the table, reminding me who I was fighting for. My parents' verdict landed heavy. "You're dead to us." While the room gasped, Tona grinned, the cruel triumph of the prized child. I waited as the blow landed, but it felt different this time. The ache was still there, but so was something else, a spark of relief. The Sullivan stage was empty. I looked each family member in the eye, collected my coat, slipped my hand into Jake's, and together, We stepped out into the bitter Illinois night, our future uncertain, but finally, our own. Under my mother's shadow, my father's silence. Growing up in the suburb of Evanston, Illinois,
Look,
our
nobody is
home
saying
always
this is
looked
easy,
like something out of a
but we
painting.
need your
Neatly
cooperation
trimmed
if we're gonna
lawn,
find him.
American flag by the porch, flower beds bursting in the spring. But the beauty outside only highlighted how heavy things could feel on the inside, especially for a kid like me, who never seemed to be quite enough, no matter how hard I tried. From as young as I can remember, my mom, Donna, was a force of nature. She had plans for everything: her day, our weekends, my childhood. She filled our calendar with piano recitals, etiquette classes, and the right birthday parties to attend. From the time I was 6, she cut out soccer, too rough, replaced it with ballet. She said grace mattered, and made sure my free time was just another checklist. If I played piano for 2 hours, she'd ask why it wasn't 3. If I got an A, the silence in the car ride home would be even longer than her lectures. She'd say, "Brooke, you want to make us proud, don't you? Then act like it." Every decision was filtered through her approval. She had a vision, and I was just one of its pieces. Everything had to be perfect, from the outfits she laid out each morning to the carefully chosen friends invited for sleepovers,
Sullivan.
always daughters of the right
Does this face look
people
familiar to
from
you?
her church group. School was its own battlefield. I loved art and creative writing, but she crossed those options off my electives slip each year. "Take debate, it builds backbone," she'd announce, handing me a stack of index cards. No one ever got ahead drawing pictures. If I lost a debate round, she'd critique my poise and diction, dissecting every and as if it cost us something precious. Through it all, my father, Dennis, was there but oddly absent. He was a financial advisor, fond of quiet mornings and long newspaper hours at the kitchen table. When Mom delivered a verdict, no sleepovers, more SAT practice, he'd just nod in agreement, eyes not leaving the finance page. "Listen to your mother, Brooke," he'd say, if I ever tried to plead my case. His passivity made it feel like I was facing her alone, and his silence rang louder than words. My younger sister, Tona, thrived in the system Mom built. Straight A's, first chair flute, debate team captain, you name it. Our house practically vibrated with her accomplishments. Mom was never happier than when Tona brought home another medal, eager to call Grandma or update her Facebook page. At dinner, when she'd praise Tona's performance, her eyes would flick to me. "Brooke, you could learn something from your sister." Sometimes I'd catch Tona's smirk from across the table, a reminder that she knew exactly where she stood. What stings most looking back isn't the rules, or even the punishments, but the feeling that I was always an inch off target. Never bad, but never quite golden. When I did try to rebel, slipping out for a forbidden art class, or hanging out with friends she didn't approve of, Mom would inevitably find out. The next morning, my privileges were gone, replaced by hours of piano drills and the cold shoulder. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone with other mothers, sighing dramatically about how hard she worked to keep me on the right track. I'd listen from the stairs, wishing she'd bragged about something, anything. I did well. Dad, as always, would retreat behind his coffee mug. My sister, meanwhile, flourished, unfazed by the pressure. Those years carved a lesson deep inside me. Love in my family was a contract, and approval was always conditional. Even as a little girl, I started to dream of escape, of a life where I could wear what I liked, choose my friends without fear, fill my notebooks with stories instead of debate prep. Most of all, I craved a home where, Being enough didn't come with such a steep price. Fleeting youth and the thirst for freedom. College, for me, was less a rite of passage than an explosion. A combustive break from a childhood spent micromanaged, measured, and molded to fit someone else's image. Before moving to Madison to attend the University of Wisconsin, I had only imagined what it felt like to breathe without permission. My teenage years in Evanston had been a series of tightropes, curfews, tracked extracurriculars, and a future mapped out by Donna's unwavering hand. My mother had divided my high school calendar into neat, color-coded blocks. SAT prep, piano practice, volunteer hours designed to haunt college applications. What I wanted rarely mattered. Deviation invited either lecture or Cold War silence. Any hint of rebellion, like a sleepover with the wrong crowd or my secret stash of sketchbooks, was quickly discovered and erased. My father, David, remained a background presence, arrayed in quiet compliance that sometimes hurt more than my mom's sharpness. "Your mother knows best," he'd mumble if I dared to ask for backing. The closest I came to autonomy was hiding in the public library, drafting short stories between covers of thick psychology textbooks. My creativity found covertness. My independence only had room to breathe behind closed doors. I'd lie awake at night, headphones pressed tight, my journal open to fantasies about living somewhere else, being seen for myself, not as an extension of my mother's reputation. Arriving in Madison felt cinematic. The air was colder, the campus humming with possibility, and for the first time, every choice belonged to me. I declared a marketing major, drawn to its blend of strategy and creativity, even as my mother sneered over the phone. "Marketing? What for?" she'd quip, pressing me to consider finance, like the Delaney girl next door. It stung, but out of earshot, I felt a kernel of defiance take root. Life at college didn't transform overnight, but everything felt new. I joined an advertising club where late-night brainstorming sessions replaced the quiet dread of family dinners. We built branding campaigns for imaginary tech startups, staying up over pizza and coffee until our ideas synced and laughter erupted over failed slogans. I thrived there, sketching logos and crafting pitches, learning the buzz of teamwork and the rush of seeing something I'd built from scratch. My first roommate, Jessica, saw the spark I kept hidden. "Brooke, you're not shy. You've just been muted too long," she joked one night, and I nearly cried at her insight. My favorite professor, a whip-smart woman named Professor Dorner, gave me the greatest validation of all. After a project presentation on ethical marketing for small businesses, she pulled me aside and said, "You've got fire. Don't let anyone threaten to put it out." That line became my private mantra, repeating in my head whenever the phone calls from home grew accusatory and doubts crept in. Freedom wasn't simple. My mom increased the pressure, questioning my choices every week and comparing my path to Tona's. "Your sister's starting her business law internship," she'd remind me, a persistent tug at my self-worth. The first semester wasn't just about adjusting to classes or deadlines. It was learning how to own my time, earn my money through part-time gigs at the campus bookstore, and battle the persistent echo of old voices telling me to shrink. The city itself became my playground and safe haven. Madison's lakes, indie cafes, and art fairs fed my restless streak. I learned to take myself on walks without an agenda, sometimes getting gloriously lost among vibrant murals or farmers' market stalls. The anonymity was delicious. No one cared who I was, who my sister was, or what my mother thought of my GPA. I found friends who valued my ideas rather than my resume. We'd sprawl out on lawns, comparing life stories in the dark, or blast 2000s hits in tiny apartments after exams. My circle wasn't huge, but it was real. These were the people who nudged me to apply for a creative internship, even when I was sure I wasn't polished enough. That job, writing copy for a cozy coffee shop's new menu campaign, would be my first taste of professional confidence, and my boss's praise felt more genuine than any compliment I'd clawed for at home. Most nights, I'd call Jake, my boyfriend, still back in Illinois, working as a mechanic, sharing the weirdness and discoveries of newfound liberty. Jake was the only person who truly saw the messy, creative part of me, who didn't flinch when I confessed to failures or fears. With him, acceptance was simple and unconditional, and I started to believe I deserved that in every aspect of my life. But even freedom, with all its shining edges, came with shadows. Guilt sometimes haunted my quietest moments. Was I leaving my parents behind, or finally forging my own way? Could I hold on to this wild, breathing version of myself when my family's pull felt so relentless? The answer wasn't neat, but it was mine to decide. College, ultimately, was the trial by fire I never knew I needed. It was a test of resolve, resourcefulness, and rebellion. It was in the coffee-fueled late nights, the unplanned detours through campus snow, and the soft validation of chosen friends that I found my own voice, one that, for the first time, I refused to let fade. Love that was never accepted. Falling for Jake Taylor started in the most ordinary way imaginable, but it blossomed into something that quietly defied every boundary my family set for me. It wasn't just his gentle smile or the way his hands could fix anything. What drew me in most was the freedom I felt around him, the rare sense that I didn't have to edit myself, shrink myself, or fit into any mold. Jake worked as a car mechanic at an old-school shop just outside the city. It's not glamorous by any means. He'd come home with smudges of grease on his arms and that earthy, honest jacket he always wore. My parents had other words for it. Blue collar, unambitious, and worst of all, not good enough for our daughter. It didn't matter that Jake was kind, patient, or that he listened in a way no one else ever had. To them, his job described him entirely, and nothing else mattered. Our first dates were simple: walks by the lakeshore, splitting milkshakes at a retro diner, or dusk drives with the windows down, classic rock humming on the radio. Jake would laugh when my hair tangled in the wind, and I found myself telling stories I'd never told anyone. Stories about childhood, my ambitions, and the ache of always feeling second best at home. With him, I was never Brooke the disappointment or Brooke the project, just Brooke, silly, flawed, alive. Introducing him to my family, however, felt like leading a friend into a storm. The first dinner was a gauntlet. Mom asked him stiff questions about career goals and stability, always steering the conversation back toward Tona's boyfriend and his glossy LinkedIn resume. Dad simply stared at his plate. Tona kept her phone in her lap, probably texting snide remarks to a cousin. The dismissal was palpable. Jake took it gracefully, never defensive, never apologetic. That only made Mom angrier. She seemed to believe humility proved his lack of ambition. Afterward, I cried in the car, angry and humiliated. Not at Jake, but at my family's inability to see what made him exceptional. He held me, saying, "I'm here if you're sure you want me to be." I never hesitated to answer, yes. From that night on, Mom's criticisms became background noise. The same refrain echoing again and again. "Why can't you find someone successful? You could do so much better. He'll hold you back." Tona, of course, played the perfect daughter. Her life neatly packaged, her boyfriend's business cards discreetly passed around holiday parties. Every interaction felt like a competition in which only she knew the rules. Jake and I kept building a world of our own, working, saving, loving in all the small and important ways. Sunday grocery runs, snowed-in movie marathons, notes left on the fridge before long workdays. We celebrated every tiny victory together. My first promotion at the agency, his successful bid to buy a share in the shop. Yet, the cloud of disapproval never quite vanished. There were birthday parties we weren't invited to, phone calls that ended in tears or tense hang-ups. My mother's voice over the phone was a mix of icy disappointment and veiled manipulation. If you really loved your family, you wouldn't hurt us like this. But with every year, the foundation of my loyalty shifted away from my family's expectations and planted itself more firmly with Jake and the life we were forging. He never once asked me to choose. He just showed up again and again until I finally realized my own worth, that I deserved the kind of love that didn't require permission or apology. Then came the engagement, quiet and private, a picnic on the lakeshore, just us and the city, blinking softly behind the trees. He didn't promise me a fairy tale, just a life we'd shape together, no matter the odds or the noise, from beyond our apartment walls. That's what love became for me. Not approval or status, but showing up. It was the quiet defiance of building happiness right in the blind spot of people who would never see its value. And that's a freedom more profound than anything I'd tasted before. Turning point, the night of truth and final break. The night of confession didn't come with warning. It crashed down out of nowhere, long after the last of November's leaves had disappeared and the glow of holiday lights painted golden shapes across Illinois' icy lawns. Remember, standing outside my parents' stately suburban home, heart pounding, fingers icy from gripping Jake's calloused hand so tightly. There's no way to anticipate the moment you finally break from your past. It just materializes, quieter and sharper than expected, like exhaling into silence and realizing that silence is an answer. Inside, the house was brimming with guests, aunts in red velvet coats, old neighbors stifling yawns over eggnog, my mother, Donna, performing hostess with crisp, brittle perfection. She was everywhere at once, finessing a tray of her famous gingerbread cookies, offering tidbits about charity events she'd orchestrated this season, and of course, dropping little updates about my sister Stacy's latest achievements. Never my own, my father David was posted up by the mantel, rocking in a haze of cigar-sweet nostalgia, laughing at the right times, but always with one eye drifting toward my mother for cues. Jake and I moved through the rooms as if held at arm's length by invisible threads. People nodded to us politely, curious, carefully neutral, their smiles pinned in place as if they sensed a coming storm. The living room pulsed with holiday music and the click of crystal glasses. But beneath the surface, the Sullivan home felt tense, stretched tight with years of unspoken words. I could sense my mother's watchfulness, the edge in her glance when Jake laughed too loudly or when I looped my arm through his. I'd considered telling everyone weeks ago about our court marriage, about the leap of faith we'd taken on a freezing day in Madison. But something in me held back. Maybe I still wanted to believe they could accept who I was choosing. As the evening drew on, waves of nostalgia hit me in the oddest places. The staircase where I posed for prom pictures, the kitchen where I baked birthday cakes for Stacy, the dining room table scarred by decades of family meals and debates. My present self flickered in the glass of old photographs lining the hallway. Brooke in braces, trying to smile, always trailing Stacy and Mom. The ghosts of obligation hung everywhere. But I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. Jake learned in whispering, "I'm with you, no matter what happens tonight." When the clock chimed 9, my mother called for everyone's attention. It was time for the family toast, a tradition as old as I could remember. The room fell quiet, the lights soft and golden, faces expectant and shining. I stood, my body trembling, but my mind finally stilled by clarity. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my mind for months. I glanced at Jake. He nodded. My voice came out stronger than I felt. "Before we celebrate, there's something I need to share." You could feel a change in the air, the kind that precedes a thunderstorm. My mother fixed me with a brittle smile, eyes narrowing. My father stiffened. Stacy set down her wine glass, lips curling, already half smirk.
Look at our sweet Clara,
Every cousin,
always so polite.
every neighbor,
And then,
every distant
there's
uncle
this
looked
one,
at me as
always
if waiting
causing
for a
static.
rehearsed speech. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Jake and I got married last week, quietly, just us." The silence that followed was shattering, as if the air itself froze. It was my mother who found her voice first. "Married? You mean you went behind our backs, Brooke?" she hissed. Her words cracked through the table like lightning. "After everything we did, this is how you repay us?" My father's face drained of color, jaw rigid. Stacy actually clapped, slow and mocking, and quipped something about settling for mechanics when you could have had millionaires. My mother's disappointment burned hotter than any flame. "That boy, this is the biggest mistake of your life. Your father and I," her words sputtered out, strangled by rage. My father found his voice, just as sharp. "You've embarrassed the family, Brooke. If you walk out with him, you don't come back. Not now, not ever." Around us, the room seethed. A few relatives protested weakly, urging everyone to calm down. But most watched the drama unfold with uneasy fascination. I had spent a lifetime trying to please these people, to earn a place at this table, not as an invisible daughter, but as myself. The realization settled over me like snow. I would never have their approval, not if I followed my own heart. For a split second, I looked at Jake, then at my mother's clenched fists, and my father's cold stare. "You want me to choose?" "Fine," I said, my voice breaking, but clear. "I choose myself. I choose Jake. You don't get to decide who I love or where I belong." My mother uttered the cruelest words I'd ever heard. "In our eyes, you're already dead." They didn't shout. They didn't have to. The words were surgical, final, and the entire party seemed to exhale all at once, as if collectively stunned by the fracture in the Sullivan legend. Stacy scoffed, her eyes glittering with triumphant spite, as if I'd given her the greatest show she'd ever witnessed. In that moment, I realized anger couldn't touch me anymore. Neither could disappointment. My heart hurt, but it beat with a new steadiness. I straightened my shoulders, returning every furious stare, and quietly responded. "Understood." Jake rose by my side, our hands clasped tightly. The room blurred behind me, relatives whispering, friends averting their eyes. My mother's face streaked with a fury she'd never let the public see. The door slammed behind us, harsh against the hush that swallowed the living room. My breath fogged in the winter air as Jake wrapped his arm around me. We walked down the sidewalk in silence, boots crunching on frosty grass. A surge of freedom rose with every step, mingled with grief and budding hope. It wasn't the ending I'd wished for as a child, clutching the staircase railing, but it was the ending I'd earned. Our future was uncertain, unmapped, and sometimes terrifying. But with Jake by my side and my own choices, finally my own, I understood what courage truly felt like. That was the night I stopped apologizing for wanting more. That was the night I truly, finally broke free, building a new life and reversal of fate. Starting over with Jake felt like a leap into the unfamiliar, a wild new chapter, with no script, no spectators, and no safety net. We moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment just north of downtown Chicago. It didn't have bay windows or perfectly trimmed hedges, but it did have sunlight that poured over the hardwood floors every morning and enough space for both our dreams to breathe. The first weeks were a blur of unpacked boxes, leftover pizza, and laughter echoing off bare, unadorned walls. For the first time in my life, I woke up without the feeling that someone else's expectations were waiting for me at the door. My job in marketing, once a symbol of quiet rebellion against my parents' wishes, began to blossom. There was no mother peering over my shoulder, no sister posting triumphant updates for all the world to see. Just me, sinking my teeth into real campaigns, earning real respect from my coworkers. I managed my first big project for a scrappy tech startup, obsessively mapping out customer journeys, pitching tagline after tagline until something clicked. When the campaign launched and exceeded sales projections, the praise from my manager was sincere and spontaneous. For the first time, I let myself linger in that moment of accomplishment, savoring validation that was earned, not demanded. Jake threw himself into his work, too, expanding his small mechanics shop with nothing but sweat, skill, and a quiet resilience. Sometimes he'd come home late, splattered with oil and smelling faintly of gasoline, but he'd always make time for a midnight walk along the river or a quick bowl of ramen at the hole-in-the-wall place beneath our apartment. Jake's hands, calloused and reassuring, told a story of steadfastness that no resume or pedigree could rival. Watching him piece together old engines and build trust with loyal customers, I realized I had fallen in love with the kind of man my family said wasn't good enough, because he was good enough for me. Most days, life in our Chicago apartment didn't feel revolutionary. It felt quietly and gloriously ordinary. We learned each other's routines, how I took my coffee black, how Jake left his work boots by the door, how we both stashed emergency chocolate bars in the freezer for rough days. Weekends were filled with small rituals, a morning farmer's market run, splitting the newspaper on lazy Sundays, or playing records while we made dinner together in our tiny kitchen. These were the small, ordinary acts of a life wholly owned, and every moment of peace felt like a victory over the noise and bitterness left behind. Of course, the past was never entirely gone. My mother's voice, sometimes sharp, sometimes pleading, would surface in my mind when I least expected it. A song in the grocery aisle, the ring of a phone I was too afraid to answer. But as weeks turned into months, those memories lost their power. The distance grew, and I stopped checking for messages that never came. Freedom, I realized, meant not just escaping the old patterns, but learning not to chase old wounds. One afternoon, as autumn crimson bled into gold and the city hummed with change, I ran into my mother's old friend, Mrs. Margaret, at a cafe. She hadn't seen me in months. Instead of pity or judgment, her eyes held an easy warmth. After a brief, gentle conversation, she said, "You've chosen the harder path, Brooke, but it's the one that's truly yours. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to keep yourself whole." Hearing those words from someone who knew my family's history gave me an unshakable sense of validation, one I never thought I'd find outside their circle. Jake's business began to flourish. Word spread about the honest mechanic who would rather stay late to get it right than cut corners
really
for a
hoped I
quick
was wrong
buck.
about this.
Before long, he took
The
on an
evidence doesn't
apprentice,
lie.
then leased more space at the garage. Every night, he'd share small victories. A tricky repair done right. A thank you note from a grateful customer. We talked about the future with an optimism I'd once only reserved for fiction. Maybe buying a second-hand house. Maybe expanding my own career. Maybe, just maybe, starting a family that would write its own rules from the beginning. Looking back, it wasn't the dramatic acts of rebellion or the final break with my parents that most defined my new life. Instead, it was the slow, daily accretion of agency. The freedom to decorate our space with colors I loved without worrying about anyone else's taste. To decide what holidays meant to us, to plan trips on a whim, or spend an idle day just wandering through new neighborhoods hand in hand. We made our own traditions as winter returned, stringing up mismatched lights, baking cookies from recipes scrawled on scrap paper, calling a handful of friends family. Sometimes loneliness crept in, especially during holidays, when memories of my family's celebrations flashed as both warmth and loss. But every time I doubted, Jake would remind me, sometimes in words, more often just in the constancy of his presence, that we had built something genuine and enduring. I learned to honor my grief without letting it take root in my future. As my career advanced, invitations began to arrive for industry talks, panel discussions, even the occasional glossy magazine feature about rising women in marketing. There was a surreal pleasure in reading my own story, one that had nothing to do with the Sullivan legacy, but everything to do with choices I'd made and risks I'd taken. My co-workers became dear friends. Our apartment, once a lonely shell, filled with joy and laughter during impromptu gatherings. Old friends from college visited, delighted to see me thriving on my own terms, no longer looking over my shoulder. My connection to the family I'd left behind faded into something almost dreamlike. I'd hear tidbits through neighbors or distant relatives, rumors about my parents downsizing, about Tona's own struggles, about changing fortunes within the world I'd once known. The reversal of fate was slower than any quick revenge fantasy. It emerged instead as a quiet, inevitable shift. For every unmet expectation, I found a new skill, a richer relationship, and a deeper peace. I realized that even if the world we built wasn't perfect, it was ours. And that mattered far more than any approval I'd been denied before. Every now and then, someone from my old world would reach out, a cousin, a childhood friend, asking if I regretted my choices. The truth was complicated, but consistent. I missed a version of family I'd never truly had. Yet I didn't miss the suffocating bargain it required. Vulnerability and hope took their place. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology or closing scene, just the steady forward march of a life deliberately chosen. Jake and I grew together with each season. We fought, we reconciled. We laughed about shipping disasters and fought over what color to paint the walls. But through every challenge, I felt my sense of self grow firmer, no longer dependent on external approval, but rooted in mutual respect, love, and a freedom I'd thought impossible. The reversal of fate, it turned out, wasn't about winning or proving anyone wrong. It was finding out that, in the end, peace and meaningful love are the greatest triumphs of all, and the surest signal that I'd finally found my way home. The collapse and the final refusal, it's almost uncanny how life's tides can turn when you least expect it. Sometimes, what once seemed like an unshakable fortress can topple overnight, and the people you thought were forever out of reach come knocking, heavy with the ghosts of their own regrets. That's exactly what happened after I cut the final tie to my family, choosing peace for myself and standing with Jake. In the aftermath of my exile, our lives began to settle into their own vibrant rhythm. But I never fully believed I'd hear from my parents again.
Helen.
How could I? After the words they had spoken, the verdict so final, so cold, that the echo of, "You're already dead to us," seemed destined to reverberate through all our futures. Yet the world, in its strange poetry, had different plans. Everything started to unravel from the other end. Swift, silent, and almost inevitable. It began with whispers from mutual friends, and the rare, awkward phone call from a distant aunt. News that Tona's carefully curated world, the one that made her the golden daughter in every room, had crumbled. She had been betrayed by someone she loved deeply, losing not only her heart, but nearly every dime she'd saved. I heard about the lies, the reckless trust she'd put in someone who saw her only as an opportunity. It shattered her, both her pride and the pedestal she'd effortlessly occupied for so long. My parents, who had staked their happiness on Tona's achievements and fortune, suddenly watched those things vanish in a tumble of debt, humiliation, and family shame. The house I'd grown up in, once the vibrant centerpiece of their self-worth, was quietly put on the market, then sold to cover debts. They moved to a cramped apartment on the far edge of town, far from the manicured lawns and social circles my mother once triumphed in. Grandma moved in with them. Nobody in the old neighborhood mentioned the Sullivans anymore. For 3 months, I received only silence, a different silence than the one I remembered from my childhood. This one wasn't heavy with judgment or expectation, just emptiness. Jake and I continued building our life in Chicago. Every so often, I'd pause while folding laundry or stirring a pot of soup and wonder how they were enduring. But each time, the ache quickly faded into something more like acceptance. My new life, hard-won and full of love, demanded all my attention, all my presence. I journaled often, sometimes writing angry letters I'd never send, sometimes confiding in Jake about the strange ache of losing not just parents, but the entire idea of a family. Even this pain grew gentler over time. And then, one rainy Thursday, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my parents standing on the stoop, older, smaller, shadows of their former selves. My father's hands shook as he removed his hat. My mother's hair, once artfully arranged, was streaked with gray and limp around her face. Behind them, the rain slicked the sidewalks and rain gutter, underscoring the raw vulnerability they carried. Jake stood at my back, steady, quiet, ready if I ever needed to lean. For a stretch of time, nobody spoke. My mother fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, searching for words with none of the iron bite I remembered. My father's eyes darted from Jake to me and quickly away again, as if confronting the cruelty of his own past actions for the very first time. "We were wrong," my mother finally whispered. Her voice cracked on the last syllable, a sound I don't remember ever hearing from her. "Everything's different now. We've lost so much. I miss you. We miss you." I felt a tidal wave of old emotions, hurt, nostalgia, longing, even a flicker of hope, crashing all at once against the wall I'd spent years building. They wanted forgiveness, perhaps even reconciliation, but I found myself unmoved, anchored in the hard-earned sense of self I'd carved out from all those years in their shadow. I studied the faces that had once loomed so large in my life, searching for even a trace of the love I'd once pleaded for. But above all, what I saw was desperation, a need not to be alone in their failing, a hunger for comfort, now that their world had collapsed. The familiar anger wanted me to lash out, demand apologies, or test their sincerity. Instead, I spoke with a quiet clarity I never knew as a daughter in their house. "You told me I was dead to you," I said, my voice calm as the rain beyond our door. "You don't get to bury someone and dig them up again just because you're lonely or afraid. I made peace with your loss. Please, let me keep that peace." My mother, a woman never bested by grief, only anger, covered her face and wept. My father reached for my shoulder, but stopped an inch short, his hand trembling mid-air, suspended by the weight of decades. He tried to murmur a plea, but I shook my head and gently closed the door between us. On the other side, silence returned, not like a prison this time, but like a boundary as firm and kind as a fence built to keep a garden safe from wild winds. Jake enfolded me as the tears finally fell. Grief, not for what was, but for what would never be. That night, we clung to each other in the quiet, the apartment filled with the slow breath of forgiveness, for myself, for the part of me that still ached, for the family that had shaped me, broken me, and in their own way, set me free. In the days that followed, my parents didn't call again. I thought often of Tona, her silent suffering in a world where conditional love had finally run out. I enrolled in therapy, let the wounds air out, and found a profound gratitude in the family Jake and I continued to build. A patchwork of friends, mentors, neighbors, and someday, maybe, children who would never need to beg for love or justify their joy. No reminders in my mother's voice, no ghosts in the kitchen air, just the ordinary mess of living as honestly as I could. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single act or moment of grace. It was a practice, a deliberate release, repeated each morning, until the old bitterness faded into a distant chill. Our apartment grew cozier, more laughter, more music, more light. Jake's work flourished. My circle of friends widened, and the city outside finally felt like a home I'd chosen, not an exile I'd been forced into. Sometimes, on silent walks at dusk, the ghost of a childhood dream, of family gathered safe and proud around a dinner table, would flicker at the edge of memory. And sometimes it still hurt, but as the years stretched on, that longing lost its sting, replaced by the fierce pride of having claimed myself at last. If I were to offer anything to someone standing on the brink of their own collapse, I'd say this: peace isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of conviction, of knowing you drew your line, stood your ground, and let go of what sought to bend you out of shape. When your past returns, battered and pleading, remember that loyalty to yourself is never selfish. Some doors must remain closed to keep your hard-won freedom alive. And ding, that final refusal, I found not loss, but liberation, a life forward, bright and unafraid, cradled always by the home I made with my own two hands.